Alright, let's travel back to one of the most fascinating and productive ages in English literary history, the Victorian era, spanning from 1837 to 1901 during the reign of Queen Victoria. Yes, that date range has been asked in exam. The Victorian Age came after the Georgian period and just before the Edwardian era, and it partly overlapped with Europe's Belle Epoque. It was a time of massive change politically, socially, and intellectually. Britain stood at the center of the world, its empire stretching across Asia and Africa, while science, industry, and technology transformed daily life. Now, religion still played a huge role. The church promoted higher moral standards, encouraging what Victorians saw as respectability. But at the same time, the age moved away from pure rationalism. Romanticism had already stirred emotion and imagination, and now the Victorians added mysticism and moral purpose to that mix. Science was booming. This was the century of germ theory, modern medicine, and engineering marvels. Economically, Britain dominated peaceful global trade, what historians call Pax Britannica. Politically, the Whigs and Tories evolved into the Liberal and Conservative parties, and by the end of the century, the Labour Party began to emerge. You'll often see names like Disraeli, Gladstone, and Peel appear in Victorian contexts worth remembering. Now, let's move to the heart of it, Victorian literature. The period from 1837 to 1901 is often called the Golden Age of the English novel. The novel became the most popular and socially influential form of writing. Why? Because it reflected real-life factories, cities, poverty, family, morality, all the big questions of a society changing faster than ever before. Writers like Charles Dickens, William Thackeray, the Bronte sisters, and Thomas Hardy dominated this landscape, all names that have been asked in exam. They weren't just storytellers, they were reformers with a pen. Dickens, for instance, used humor and pathos to criticize child labor and class injustice. Hardy questioned religion and the rigid moral codes of society. Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote passionately against child exploitation in her poetry. Poetry didn't fade either. In fact, two towering figures, Alfred Tennyson and Robert Browning, gave Victorian poetry its moral strength and lyric beauty. The theatre, too, was thriving by the late 19th century, led by dramatists like Oscar Wilde, George Bernard Shaw, and the duo Gilbert and Sullivan, all of whom you'll definitely see in exam papers. In short, Victorian literature explored everything: science, faith, morality, progress, love, loss, and reform, reflecting a world both confident and anxious about its own success. Now let's meet the poet who became the voice of the age, Alfred Lord Tennyson. He was born in Somersby, Lincolnshire, the son of a clergyman, a quiet rural background that shaped his love of nature and reflection. Tennyson studied at Trinity College, Cambridge, and in 1828 he even won the Chancellor's Medal for his poem Timbuktu. That's an exam favorite. He left Cambridge without a degree and spent years writing in near obscurity. But through steady work and perseverance, his poetic voice grew stronger. After Wordsworth's death, Tennyson was appointed Poet Laureate in 1850, and yes, that appointment has been asked in exam too. Life wasn't always easy. He lost money in a failed investment in 1844, but a royal pension the next year saved him. Later, he moved with his wife to Freshwater on the Isle of Wight, where he lived quietly, producing some of his greatest works, including In Memoriam A.H.H, The Charge of the Light Brigade, Ulysses, and The Lady of Shalott. In 1884, he was made Baron Tennyson, joining the House of Lords, a rare honor for a poet. When he died in 1892, he was buried with great ceremony in Westminster Abbey alongside Chaucer and Dickens. That too is a recurring exam question. After his death, the laureateship passed to Alfred Austin in 1896, marking the end of one poetic era and the beginning of another. Tennyson's poetry perfectly captures the Victorian mood, the tension between faith and doubt, the love of nature, the celebration of heroic endurance, and the quiet sorrow of loss. His verse is musical, moral, and majestic. No wonder Queen Victoria herself adored him. Or, as Samuel Johnson once said of Goldsmith, we might say of Tennyson too, he touched nothing that he did not adorn. Tennyson's poetic journey began very young. His first collection, Poems by Two Brothers, 1826, was written in collaboration with his elder brother Charles Tennyson, and yes, that collaboration has been asked in exam. Just a few years later came Timbuktu, 1829, a long visionary poem that won him the Chancellor's Prize at Cambridge, another popular exam question. It already showed the grand imagination and musical phrasing that would define his career. Then came Poems, chiefly lyrical, 1830, published while he was still an undergraduate. This volume includes Isabel, Madeline, and the strange atmospheric sonnet, The Kraken, which, by the way, has been asked in exam as one of his earliest sonnets. His next milestone was Poems 1832, which marked a real step forward in maturity. It contains Mariana in the South, the Palace of Art, and the unforgettable The Lady of Shalott. Now, Mariana is particularly interesting. Its premise actually originates from Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, a fact that's been asked in exam. And The Lady of Shalott, another favorite, is a lyrical ballad inspired by the 13th century Italian tale Donna di Scelotta. It retells the tragic story of Elaine of Astolat, a lonely maiden confined in a tower up the river from Camelot. And yes, that setting detail has been directly asked in exam. Tennyson followed that with Poems 1833, which includes the classical piece Ennona and his hauntingly musical The Lotos-Eaters. This poem, based on an episode from Book 9 of Homer's Odyssey again, asked in exam, opens with the famous lines, "Courage," he said, and pointed toward the land. "This mounting wave will roll us shoreward soon." As Odysseus and his mariners reach a mysterious coast, a land in which it always seemed afternoon, they meet the mild-eyed, melancholy Lotos-Eaters. Those phrases have been exam favorites too. The Lotos-Eaters offer the sailors strange fruit that induces drowsy forgetfulness. Slowly, the mariners lose all desire to return home. They drift into dreamlike song, asking why human beings must endlessly labor while nature rests in its cycles of bloom and decay. They begin to crave long rest or death, another line that has appeared in exam, preferring peaceful oblivion to struggle. By the end, they choose the death-like existence of Lotus Land, whispering of tired eyes and tired eyelids upon tired eyes, yet finding a strange beauty in their surrender. In these early works, you can already feel the tension that defines Tennyson, the pull between faith and doubt, effort and repose, action and dream. From the mystical calm of the Lotos-Eaters to the tragic isolation of the Lady of Shalott, Tennyson was beginning to give voice to the emotional and moral concerns of the coming Victorian world. Alright, let's travel back to 1842, a year that marks one of the greatest moments in Victorian poetry, the publication of Alfred Lord Tennyson's poems. This collection contains some of his most celebrated works, including Break, 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 Morte di Arthur, and, of course, Ulysses. Let's start with Break, Break, Break. It's a short elegy but deeply emotional. Tennyson wrote it after the death of his closest friend Arthur Henry Hallam, and that fact has been asked in exam. The poem captures that quiet ache of loss as waves break endlessly on the shore, mirroring grief that never really fades. The simplicity of the language hides the depth of feeling, the stillness of mourning, and the endless motion of memory. Now, from that same collection comes Morte di Arthur, a retelling of King Arthur's final moments, another one that's been asked in exam. It anticipates the later Idylls of the King, showing Tennyson's fascination with courage, death, and the fading of old ideals. But the poem that towers above them all is Ulysses. This is one of Tennyson's finest achievements, a blank verse, dramatic monologue, and yes, both those terms have been asked in exam. At first glance, Ulysses seems to be about Homer's hero, the aged king of Ithaca, restless and weary of his domestic life. But if you look closer, the poem is really about Tennyson himself, about how he processed the loss of his friend Hallam. Like Ulysses, Tennyson feels stuck between memory and purpose, longing to venture beyond the sunset once more. Ulysses begins with that famous cry of dissatisfaction. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. It's a declaration of defiance, of refusing to fade quietly into comfort or old age. He reflects on his glorious past, saying, I am become a name, because his reputation now stands in place of his life. Every experience, he says, is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world, a gateway to the unknown. That image, the arch of experience, has been asked in exam and perfectly captures the spirit of curiosity and longing that defines the poem. Ulysses refuses to let his life rust unburnished. He wants to keep shining in use. So he entrusts his throne to his son Telemachus. This is my son, mine own Telemachus. He works his work, I mine. It's such a tender acknowledgement, a recognition that father and son serve different callings. And then comes that thrilling turn, Ulysses calling out to his old comrades for one last journey. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. He admits that death closes all, but insists that even in old age, some work of noble note may yet be done. That line, another exam favorite, reminds us that courage is timeless. The poem moves toward a magnificent close. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles. Here he imagines a reunion with the dead, echoing Tennyson's own grief for Hallam. Finally, Ulysses ends with one of the most quoted lines in English literature, and yes, it's always in exam. That which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. What a powerful ending! It's both a farewell and a manifesto, a call to live fully, even when life feels diminished by time or loss. So, in Ulysses, Tennyson transforms grief into motion, turning despair into determination. He shows that life's greatest voyage might just be the courage to keep going. And that's what makes Ulysses timeless, not just a poem about an ancient hero, but about every human being who refuses to surrender to fate. His poetry moves between doubt and faith, emotion and reason, and personal grief and national pride. Let's walk through a few of his key works, all of them, by the way, absolute favorites in the exam. Let's begin with Locksley Hall. This dramatic monologue captures the feelings of a rejected lover returning to his childhood home. Tennyson called it a study of young life, its good side, its deficiencies, and its yearnings. That exact phrase has been asked in exam, so keep it in mind. The speaker reflects on lost love and on the larger progress of humankind, leading to one of Tennyson's most famous lines. Yet, I doubt not through the ages one increasing purpose runs, and the thoughts of men are widened with the process of the suns. This line, too, has appeared in exam, symbolizing Victorian optimism, the belief in human progress and divine order. Next comes The Princess, published in 1847. It's a long narrative poem subtitled A Medley, and it's often linked to the idea of the new woman. The poem imagines a women's university founded by Princess Ida, a radical idea in the 19th century. Within this poem, Tennyson inserted a series of lyrical interludes or songs. One of these, Tears, Idle Tears, became more famous than the poem itself. And yes, its inclusion in The Princess has been asked in exam. The poem blends humor, irony, and gentle sympathy for women's education, a truly forward-looking theme for its time. Now, let's move to one of Tennyson's greatest and most personal achievements, In Memoriam A.H.H., published in 1850. This is an elegy written to mourn his close friend Arthur Henry Hallam, who died suddenly in Vienna in 1833. It's composed in a special 4-line A-B-B-A stanza of iambic tetrameter, now known as the In Memoriam meter, and that form itself has been tested in exam. The poem opens with an invocation to the strong Son of God, blending Christian faith with scientific uncertainty, a hallmark of the Victorian mind. Through its many sections, Tennyson moves from despair to renewed faith, expressing the pain of loss and the search for spiritual meaning. It's packed with famous lines. "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." That one is an exam favorite. "Nature, red in tooth and claw," a line that captures the harsh, evolutionary struggle of nature. "Knowledge will grow from more to more," expressing Victorian belief in scientific progress. And don't forget the philosophical question. And shall he, man, be blown about the desert dust, or sealed within the iron hills? All these have been individually asked in exam. The poem even refers to dragons of the prime, an image of prehistoric life representing the conflict between science and faith. Finally, we come to Tennyson's patriotic masterpiece, The Charge of the Light Brigade, written in 1854 when he was Poet Laureate. This narrative poem celebrates the heroism of British soldiers during the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War. The soldiers, following a mistaken order, charged into near certain death, but their courage became legendary. As Tennyson put it, "The British soldier will do his duty even to certain death, and is not paralyzed by the feeling that he is the victim of some hideous blunder." That line too has been asked in exam. With its rhythmic gallop, half a league, half a league, half a league onward, the poem's movement echoes the beat of the charge itself. It's not just patriotic, it's musical, visual, and intensely emotional. N4. So to sum it up, Locksley Hall captures youthful idealism and disillusionment. The princess speaks for women's education and social progress. In Memoriam mourns loss, but restores faith in divine purpose. And The Charge of the Light Brigade immortalizes courage in the face of error and death. Through all these works, Tennyson becomes the voice of an age struggling to balance science, faith, progress, and emotion, the perfect mirror of Victorian England itself. We begin with Maud and Other Poems, published in 1855, and yes, that date has been asked in exam. The chief poem here, Maud, is described as a monodrama, another exam favorite term. What that means is that the entire story is told through the voice of one speaker, capturing his love, madness, and despair. The poem feels almost psychological, a Victorian blend of passion and instability, and it marks one of Tennyson's boldest experiments in form and emotion. Next comes Idylls of the King, first published in 1859. This monumental work retells the legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, but it's much more than a collection of medieval tales. Tennyson presents it as an allegory of the soul of man, exploring purity, temptation, and moral decay in Victorian society. The Idylls eventually grew to 12 poems, but the first 4, Enid, Vivian, Elaine, and Guinevere, were published together in that first edition, a detail that's often asked in exam. Through these characters, Tennyson explores human virtue, betrayal, and redemption, all under the symbol of Arthur's fading kingdom. Then there's Tithonus, also from 1859, one of Tennyson's most haunting dramatic monologues, and yes, both the year and the form are common exam questions. The poem gives us the voice of Tithonus, a mortal who was granted immortality by Eos, the goddess of the dawn. But here's the tragic twist: Eos forgot to ask for eternal youth. So while she stays forever radiant, Tithonus ages endlessly. He speaks at the quiet limit of the world, reflecting on his pride, his decaying body, and his yearning for death. "Let me go, take back thy gift," he pleads, realizing the gods cannot undo what they have given. It's a quiet, mournful meditation on time, love, and mortality. Next, we have Enoch Arden, published in 1864, a deeply emotional narrative poem. Again, that classification is asked in exam. It tells the story of a humble fisherman, Enoch, who leaves home to support his family but ends up shipwrecked on a desert island for 10 long years. When he finally returns, he finds his wife happily remarried and decides to keep his survival secret so as not to disturb her peace. It's a moving story of sacrifice and silent love, one of Tennyson's most touching human tales. Then comes Locksley Hall, 60 years after, published in 1885, where Tennyson revisits the same speaker from his earlier Locksley Hall. The idealistic youth of the original poem has now grown old and disillusioned. It's a reflection on time, progress, and disappointment, a kind of poetic mirror to the Victorian century itself. And finally, we reach one of Tennyson's most beautiful short poems, Crossing the Bar, from 1889. This is often read as his poetic farewell to life. The entire poem is built on an extended metaphor comparing death to a ship sailing calmly across a sandbar into the open sea. The pilot at the end of the journey is, of course, God. The imagery is serene and hopeful, not fearful, a perfect summation of Tennyson's lifelong meditation on faith and immortality. His historical plays include Queen Mary from 1875, Harold from 1877, and Becket from 1884, all based on real English rulers and events. These titles have been asked in exam, so keep them in mind. Then come his comedies, The Falcon from 1879, adapted from Boccaccio, The Cup from 1880, based on Plutarch, and The Foresters from 1892, a light retelling of the Robin Hood legend. So, from royal tragedy to gentle comedy, Tennyson's stage works show his poetic touch across history, myth, and humor. Let me tell you a little bit about a dramatic monologue. It is a poem where a single speaker talks to a silent listener, revealing their innermost thoughts, emotions, and motives, almost like overhearing a confession. Some of the most famous examples have been asked in exam. Ulysses and Tithonus by Alfred Lord Tennyson, Porphyria's Lover, The Bishop Orders His Tomb at St. Praxed's Church, Caliban upon Setebos, and My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, Lady Lazarus by Sylvia Plath, and Medusa by Carol Ann Duffy.